Well, I want to thank everyone for taking your lunch time and spending this time with us today. And yes, someone mentioned, I'm so glad, they said they checked that they knew that at one point we're going to do two lessons. And I too had that feeling. So I emailed Jane just for confirmation. And she said, yes, this was the time we were going to do lesson 4 and 5. And actually, I was thrilled to hear that, because as I was reading lesson 4 and then started reading lesson 5, I felt like they really did complement each other so well. So really today, I'm going to just be fluid in and through those two places. And so kind of putting all the layers of both into the study. So you'll kind of hear like a little bit from here and a little bit from here, and hopefully we'll tie it all together in a beautiful bow. But the other thing that really struck me is that I was reading those two is how timely lamenting death and lamenting life is for us corporately. And I want to introduce, I invited my friend Craig to join us. Craig is the music director at Olivet, and he's going to play some music for us in a moment. And so Craig and I just came from our staff meeting, and we were struck at how much loss our congregation has felt, not just in the last week or two, but in the last couple months. For an example of what's going on in our congregation, in the last 2 months, we've mourned the loss of one of our older members who died not of COVID, but had an aggressive form of cancer, and she was diagnosed quickly and she died very quickly. And then just a few weeks ago, just last week, our congregation buried a young adult who was struggling with mental health, and he took his life. And in between those two, we've had family members who've died from COVID. We've had neighbors who've died from COVID. We've had friends who've lost friends. And so I want to come to you all today to say, I know if our congregation is experiencing that, I imagine your prayer lists are looking very, very similar. With over 400,000 people who've died this year, it's a sure thing that we either know someone who's lost a loved one, or you yourself have lost a loved one. And I know you're also grieving losses related to cancer and heart attacks and substance abuse and mental health, because in addition to COVID, there's still all of this pain in the world. And so it's even harder in moments like this to share this, seeing you all in screens on Zoom, because you all probably know each other much better than I know you. And it's hard to prepare such a personal and tender subject and lead it on Zoom. I shared with Kelly, I have some things I want to share, but I also want to be able to see your faces. So we'll probably go back and forth. We can't not be touched by death in the midst of a pandemic. And I know the weight of that grief, both corporate and personal, is quite heavy. So I just invite us all to do our best together as we share gently today, knowing that we don't quite know what each of us are bringing to this time together, but we're probably each bringing a little bit of our heart with us. And I've invited Craig to help us make some space for that grief and lament. And he's going to open our time together with Precious Lord.
Precious Lord, linger near when my life is almost gone. Hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me on. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my work is all done and my race here is run, let me see by the light. Thou hast shown that fair city where the lantern is light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me on. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home.
Let us pray together. God of life, you know the pain of death. You know the suffering that comes with the loss of a loved one, but you also possess the power of resurrection. In our study, may we know again that with you is life, no matter what this world would rather we believe. You have called each of us into being, and you call each of us by name. You call each of us your child. You know us completely, and you love us in Jesus Christ through your word and our words. Speak to our lives that we may know you are with us always. Amen.
Amen.
So as you heard Craig play, I thought I'd love to start our time together just hearing what images or thoughts came to mind as you listened.
Well, just that image of being so exhausted, you know, and God coming and taking your hand and lifting him up. And the lectionary gospel for this past Sunday, which I'm actually using this Sunday, is about Jesus taking the hand of Peter's mother-in-law and just lifting her up. And so I kind of thought about that, and just a lot of childhood memories associated with that hymn, hearing it sung in church. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Connie.
Kelly, can
Yes.
you hear me? This is
Yes.
Barbara.
Hi, Barbara. Yes, we can hear you.
I don't know what's the deal with the picture, but it's certainly our system here. But I've noticed we received our Horizons magazine this week, and the whole issue is focused on the situations that we're in now. And there's one that deals with, I'm so tired, I'm so weary. And my Max Lucado devotion for today had to do about weariness. And I think all of that is coming into focus, that it's more than the physical as is the mental and emotional and spiritual weariness that we've got for being in this situation for almost a year. I'm still in lockdown where I am.
Barbara, thank you for sharing. Yes, that tiredness and weariness, that exhaustion that Thomas Dorsey spoke to in the song. Absolutely.
Piggybacking on what Barbara said, a nurse in my church choir has talked about failure to thrive has taken on a new meaning in a lot of retirement communities, not only because the virus spreads so much through there, but the isolation and loneliness has taken its toll on so many residents, from that they just give up. They probably are gone sooner than they would have been had it not been for the isolation and weariness. They probably are glad to see Jesus take them home.
I think too, Kelly, about just some of the younger parents right now that are particularly with younger children that are dealing with the online learning situation and trying to juggle work and just all the women who've actually left the workforce and the impact of that on their lives and on the jobs, that they have left. And just that's what I hear from, some younger families, is just that it is absolutely exhausting. It's burning, a candle at both ends and not seeing an end in sight for a lot of these families.
Very much so. I can say yes to all of that. A lot of my friends have been feeling that the last week or so. In fact, the snow, believe it or not, while it's canceled a lot of school, has been such a welcome relief just because it's gotten us outside and seeing people's faces and off our computers a little bit. But yes, absolutely, the weariness and all those places. And yes, the failure to thrive. I've heard that among friends who've lost parents this year, who often will say, my parent didn't die of COVID, but because of the isolation, we feel it increased the speed of this death happening. I've heard that a lot. Anyone else want to share what you felt as you heard that? Heard precious Lord. Well, I hope I picked that one specifically because it was mentioned in the study. So you all have probably read the story about Thomas Dorsey, and he wrote it in response to his wife and newborn son dying, to help it helped him understand lament as it relates to grief and loss and mourning. Again, I'm so glad you all got to meet Craig. He's so wise, and I learned so many things from him today. And I wish I had written down what he said in staff meeting today, because at the funeral this past Sunday, there was a lot of music played. We were able to live stream, and in our church, we can only do piano music, but it was all familiar hymns. And one of our staff members said, it's amazing how a memorial service is a highlight of the top 20 hymns we all know and love. And Craig said that when we don't have words, it's amazing how music will hit the heart where it needs it. And how often that's where we, when we can't quite say what we're feeling, it's the music that finds the words. I wonder if there's a hymn or a song that does that for you, when you're feeling like you're lamenting, grieving, or mourning.
There's not a particular song.
Mhm.
Well, I guess, yeah, maybe. Peace Like a River. I have been known to lie in bed and just sing over and over, Peace Like a River to myself. And I will say, back to when you were talking about funerals, as a choir member
Mhm.
who has sung at the funeral of like one of our own,
Mhm.
that's a very powerful way to show the family. One in particular, a very dear man, and he asked for us to sing "I'll Be on My Way" at his funeral. And, another one of his dear friends took the solo part, and that was a very powerful and a very good release for our
Mhm.
emotions.
Yes, thank you, Melissa, for sharing. I'm always interested what people choose to have sung. My stepmother-in-law passed away last January, and she wanted Blackbird by the Beatles sung by the choir. And it was actually so beautiful and touching, and it made so much sense for her. I love hearing what different people choose.
Well, my aunt who died, and her service was not in a church, but she died like in the 80s, and she was a child of the 40s and 50s. So the pre-service music was things like 5'2", Sunny Side of the Street, that kind of stuff that got everybody really talking about her and remembering her in a very joyful way before we went into the lament.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you, Melissa, for sharing. I love that. Anyone else have a hymn that touches you, or a song that speaks to you in that time when you might be lamenting, or speaks to your heart when you don't know what to say?
In the Hopewell community, until COVID hit, we have been doing community singspirations, hymn sings. And it's always interesting. A lot of times it's a pre-planned program, but most of the time it's the old style, call it out of the hymnal, what you want to sing type gathering. And nearly every time they always pick It Is Well With My Soul, which, and of course, the story behind that, similar to Precious Lord, came out of loss of family on the ship that sank. And then another one, I'll share a Massanetta story, since we have a lot of Massanetta friends on the call here. The last summer that my mom was living, I took her with me to Massanetta for the Bible conference. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and she must have heard the children singing, but she was singing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot in her sleep. And so I always think about that. We sang that at her memorial service, because that has such a special meaning to me.
Thank you, Jane. Isn't it interesting how even songs will remind us of people that we love, and they become something, and then it's always that tie to you, to that person. As we're talking, I thought about this, sharing within our communities of faith, but as a nation, we often will use song to mourn as well. And the image that just popped into my mind was when President Obama sang Amazing Grace after the Mother Emanuel shooting at the funeral. How that song, it was like he knew what to say, and he said what he had to say, and then he just sang, and it was like he could tie our national grief together. So it's amazing how song has really been a form of lament for us. So one of the questions that came up in the study in lesson 4, and I'm still sort of wrestling with, so I'm interested in some of your thoughts, is the difference between mourning and lamenting. What's the difference between mourning and lamenting? Is there a difference, or are they the same?
I think that lamenting is when, I think you can do both at the same time. For me, I think of lament as just lamenting the fact of death. You know, when you lose someone or when someone passes away and it's tragic and sad, I lament the fact of death in this life, right? But then you mourn. To me, that's it's much more personal. That's when you mourn the passing of a loved one. So, but you know, when we have public events that elicit a lot of grief, like the school shootings, I'm not sure where that distinction falls in a situation like that. You know, I'm certainly lamenting the fact that someone would hate that much or have so little compassion, you know, to want to take the lives of young people. But I'm also identifying in a way with those parents what that must feel like for them. So I guess that's mourning in a sense. I'm not sure. I think it's a really hard line to draw between those two.
It is, but I kind of look at it that mourning is a monologue and lamenting is a dialogue.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, I
Yes.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mourning is a monologue and lamenting is a dialogue. And I think that really gets with where the author is getting, that the lament is that conversation with you, God, and then who's listening around you.
Yeah.
Anyone else, other thoughts? Today we're on spotlight view, so I don't see everyone. So I'm giving lots of pause to let you jump in. So we just talked about kind of the difference between mourning and lamenting, and lamenting the death.
Kelly,
Yes.
you can change your view to gallery. I did a couple of spotlights, but I've turned them off.
Okay.
So yes, you can turn yourself back to gallery view if that helps you. Sorry
Yes,
about
does.
that.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you everyone for being patient as I continue to learn Zoom. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the mourning and the lamenting, and so here's where I think these two lessons really complemented each other. So as I was reading lesson 4, and I thought lesson 4 really was about the lament of death, but I thought lesson 5 really connected us with, when she talked about lamenting life, I really saw it as walking alongside our people, our friends, our family, our community of faith, as they are mourning. Because as I was trying to understand what she meant by lamenting life, it's that sitting in the pain and suffering and still finding hope through it. But then I also thought, but there's lots of things we mourn, or there are lots of deaths that we lament that aren't necessarily a death of a person. So for example, I thought like the death of a relationship or a loss of a relationship, whether it's divorce or just a partnering relationship or a friendship, if that ends, there can be a period of feeling alone or suffering or loss. What are some other maybe deaths we experience that then has some kind of suffering or pain that we then sit in that you can think of? Anything that comes to mind?
I think a lot of church members are feeling the loss of being able to gather together. I mean, when this thing first started, and it was the whole Holy Week and Easter services that just happened nowhere. I mean, because we didn't have enough time to plan. A lot of people just and are still going through that because we can't gather together like we did.
Absolutely. Melissa, thank you for naming that. And I think in our grief too, right, we're people who gather when we mourn. And so there's a loss of that too, and trying to figure out how to mourn and lament as a community when we can't do it the way that we have.
Yeah. My best friend's from the 3rd grade mother just died, and she was 91, and she was in West Virginia. I couldn't go.
Gonna go.
And I couldn't be there with her, for Brenda. It was hard for her.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. So we're also not able to walk alongside. There's that loss too. Other thoughts about sort of loss or death that we are lamenting or experiencing?
Loss of youth. And that happens at various stages. But truly, I mean, I've heard older people, and I've never forgotten this. Somebody described it one time as your body betraying you. And I think for a lot of folks, that's what it feels like. You know, the things that you've always been able to do with your body, suddenly you can't do those things anymore. And that can happen in so many ways, and just the loss of independence that eventually comes with that as well. It really is almost like mourning a death for a lot of people. It's been my observation anyway.
I heard a young mother just say that she felt betrayed by her body, not that she's like, I'm so proud my body just gave birth, but my body can't do what it could do 9 months ago. Yeah. And it was an interesting thought. Anyone else have a thought or something you want to share?
Well, my congregation is mourning in a sort of mixed emotions, the retirement of our longtime pastor. And that's been really difficult, and was made more difficult by the fact that this last Sunday it snowed, and so we weren't able to be together physically. It had to be on Zoom, but thankfully there is Zoom, so we could at least see one another. But that's a hard thing too. It's a loss of a relationship, even though it's a happy reason, as they begin a new chapter. But it's going to take some getting used to.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane. And I was thinking about that too. I remember the loss of pastoral relationships was discussed last time we were together. And in fact, I think I shared our congregation, that was sort of the beginning of our loss last January. Our longtime pastor retired, and then we actually had about 4 or 5 weeks of some fairly significant deaths, and we thought, gosh, 2020 has started off really hard. And then COVID came. And so we've been doing a lot of reflecting on that. But absolutely. And even though some of those loss of relationships are happy ones, you're happy for your pastor and you're happy for that relationship that you had, there is still a death that you experience from that. And as we read in lesson 5, I'm going to share my screen, because actually, as I was thinking, and I'm so glad Melissa talked about not being able to be there for your friend, because that's the other thing, that in the lesson 5, the author was really helping us to see. So sometimes we're like Job, experiencing the pain and suffering. Sometimes we're Job's friends. And so, like, how do we respond to the friend lamenting? And I thought about, I'm sure you all have seen these cards, but I thought about this woman who made these cards. And so, have you heard of Emily McDowell and her empathy cards? She felt like, you know how every once in a while you're going through something and someone says something to you and you're like, that just didn't help at all. I mean, that's Job's friends, right? Job's friends aren't helpful at all. And it's really hard sometimes. So Emily McDowell made something called empathy cards. She's a cancer survivor, and she kind of got tired of getting cards that said the wrong thing. Another favorite story I have Have any of you read or heard of Kate Bowler? She wrote the book, Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies People Have Told Me. She writes about her cancer diagnosis, and she said people sent her sympathy cards, like, I'm sorry you've died. And she's like, that was not helpful. So Emily McDowell, let me see if I can get my, oh, there we go. We've done that. So she started writing these cards, and she's actually written a book about it. Says there's no good card for this. What to say and do when life's is awful and hard for the people you love. I'm sorry, that's a little bit blurry, but this is one of her cards. There's no good card for this. I'm so sorry. These were a little fuzzy too, but I think I can read them. Together, we can find a cure for the phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'm really sorry I haven't been in touch. I didn't know what to say. And when people say it's a marathon, not a sprint, I don't think they get how much you hate running. I like that one a lot because I don't like running. But I thought to myself, Emily McDowell and her cards are like a modern day lament, right? We're proclaiming to someone that we understand that this hurts and is not fair, but it really kind of gets at the sort of heart of it. But I love the card that says, you know, I'm sending you this card, but I don't really know what to say. And I think sometimes let me find the note here. When she started talking about Job, on the side here, she asked the question, how do we respond when friends and loved ones lament their lives? Are we too much like Job's friends, wanting to cheer up or get on with it? And I've read a lot of notes about that. I'm like, why is it that it's hard to walk alongside our friends when they're lamenting? Because I'll be honest, I am sure at some point I have been like Job's friends, not meaning to. I don't think Job's friends meant to. So why is it, or how do we respond when friends and loved ones lament their lives?
Well, I think our inclination is to try to fix it.
Yes.
And so then we go like way too far and say the wrong thing. Interestingly, I was watching an old British mystery last night, a murder mystery, and the widow of the character that got killed told her best friend, I've got to go out and go for a walk. And the friend said, I'll go with you. And she said, I don't really want to talk about this. And the friend said, I can walk and not talk.
Mm.
And they did.
Mm-hmm.
Which we need to remember sometimes. Walk and don't talk.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a hard time because everything that happens to other people raises that fear for us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's always in the back of our mind, that it could be my child, it could be my husband, it could be me. You know, if it's possible for another person to suffer in that way, then it's possible for me to suffer as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we have to make a conscious effort to get beyond that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when my mother lost her sister, I was a teenager then, and just so much outpouring of, you know, sympathy and everything. And she said that the thing that meant the most to her was when someone, one of her close friends, wrote her a card and said something like, I don't know what to say, but I just want you to know how much I love you.
Mm-hmm.
And when my sister and I were going through some papers from my mom's house a few months ago, we found that card. She had saved that card, and she's still living, but you know, she's at the point where, here's my papers, you guys go through them. You know? But I always remembered that, but just that I love you, you know, I just, what else can you say, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's wonderful what we can kind of reach beyond our own reaction of fear and really love somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like what both of you said, Melissa and Connie. One, we're fixers. We like to fix things.
mm-hmm.
And the fear, reach beyond our own reaction of fear. I think both of those things are true. Any other thoughts?
You made me think about one of my colleagues at the bank lost her home. It burned to the ground one weekend while she was away. And of course, that was such an emotional time. But I remember her saying the thing that happened after she got back home, after they had been called and told about the fire. She said one of her neighbors just had tears streaming down her face, but she came over and hugged her, and she handed her a bag of underwear because she just figured that was something she could do for her. But that ministry of presence is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we just need to be quiet and be there.
Mm-hmm.
I love that ministry of presence. And as I was kind of going around on the PW site, Lynn actually blogs on some of the lessons as well. And so I read her blog actually on lesson 4. She wrote about the gift of a casserole.
Yeah.
And I loved it because a couple of years ago, I was with it's a seminary friend, but he happened to introduce me to Evan. So he's Evan's best friend from childhood and my next door neighbor in seminary. And that's how we met. So I was in the car with this friend, and he had another pastor friend who I didn't know very well, but I think we were together for a wedding or something. I don't know. And the other pastor friend, the one I didn't know very well, was about to do his doctoral ministry kind of work. And I said, well, what are you doing it on? It's like, well, I'm gonna do a lot of studying about food and food and ministry. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And he was going to say, Americans have such problems with food, and we overeat and we're obese. And what's the first thing we do when someone dies? We bring all the casseroles over. And I thought, I'd never sort of thought about that way. And I kind of wish I knew him better. I don't know him well enough, so I don't know how his doctoral research went out or how it happened. But in the last few years, we've experienced some pretty significant loss, and literally had 2 people show up at the door with 2 lasagnas. And I've never been so thankful to see food in my life, not because I needed it, but because as Lynn wrote in her blog, the food nourishes us, not just physically, but spiritually. And I wish I had thought about that way back in the day when I was in the car with that friend, to say, no. The food is not just something that someone's putting in their body. It's a ministry of presence. And that's a way that we can care. And I think also it gives us something to do, right? For those times when we don't know what to do. I tell people all the time, I don't know what to do, but I made you banana bread. I just did. I don't even know if you'll eat it, but here. And I think too, we get better at it when we experience our own Job moments. When we have our own Job moments, when we experience our own loss, in those experiences, we come to know better how to love and care for people. And so I ask if you're willing to share, if you've had an experience, and kind of you shared about the card about your sister, when you've what you've learned from maybe your own Job moment to be Job's friends. What have you learned about being that friend from your own experiences? Or maybe something that someone said to you that you're like, gosh, that really, I'm glad that person said it that way.
Well, I'll share this. There was a period a few years ago when I was trying to get my mom transitioned into assisted living, and I was, of course, and I'm an only, okay, and she was 6 hours away. So there's that, and so she had fallen and broken her ankle, and so I was really pressed to get this done because my husband, who was here, was having knee replacement surgery. It was on the books. He'd been to the training and whatever. And I had, all this stuff going on, trying to find a place in assisted living, trying to get him, and my head was really just about ready to explode. And two things happened. Bob, when I was talking to him one time, Bob said, I'm rescheduled. Don't, it's all good. And the nurse in the hospital, when my mom was getting ready to get discharged, said to me that the social worker, I'm sorry, that the nurses had taken a vote and they voted me Daughter of the Year for what because they knew what all I was going through and how I had, and that I'll never forget that nurse saying that to me, because I just thought, wow, I'm not totally screwing this up. I'm not making this all about me. It's, it was a very tough time.
Yes. Oh, Melissa, absolutely. And isn't it wonderful how an experience of someone just saying, you're doing a great job. I try to remember that, no longer being a young mom, because I have a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old. I try really hard when I see a toddler screaming in Trader Joe's to look at the mom and say, you're doing a great job. Because this too shall pass doesn't help in that moment. Absolutely, those experiences help us to walk alongside. I do know that, and this is kind of a surprise, so I just want to know if anyone's willing. We have just a little bit of time left, and I love all the sharing that we're doing. Each lesson, the author really challenges us to just kind of practice our own laments, or write our own laments. And I wondered if any of you have been doing that or did that. And if you did, if there's anything that you would like to share or share about that experience. I wasn't sure if anyone had been doing that. And it's okay if you haven't. I just wanted to honor it if someone had, because I think it's beautiful. In fact, the one in lesson 4, the selecting a person whose life you want to remember and find a tune, I was like, oh, that's so lovely. I feel like I would have to spend a lot of time on that, but I love that thought. Well, I want to share, I have a few more here on the screen to share. A few more of these cards. Come on, computer. There we go. So I really wanted to share this card, and so I deal sometimes with difficult subjects with a little bit of humor. I loved this one. If this is God's plan, God is a terrible planner. No offense if you're reading this, God. You did a really good job with other stuff like waterfalls and pandas.
I love that. I want one.
Yes. We should all have this hung up, right? And I brought this one out because I wanted us to just think a little bit about the 3 stories that Lynn highlighted in lessons 4 and 5. And they're all fairly familiar stories to us. The first is that story from John. Lazarus has died. Mary and Martha are grieving. And do you all feel like, I feel like I can feel Mary in my heart when she says, when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here with my brother, he would not have died. And it just, it gets to me every time I hear it. I can hear all her pain and grief and lament. Can't you? Like, if you had been an hour earlier, and how many moments like that have we felt that? For Job, she had a lot of the Job story in there. he's not dying, but he's lost everything, and he's sitting on an ash. And in his lament, I took pieces of his lament. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. Let the day perish on which I was born. Let that day be darkness. Why did I not die at birth? Come forth from the womb and expire. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. I think a lot about a lot of the young adults that I know who are just struggling with mental illness. My experience at Massanetta in the last 4 or 5 years, I have come to see that there is a lot more mental illness in young adults than I saw 10 or 15 years ago. And when I read that, I thought about them. And then Mary Magdalene at the tomb, Mary's faithfully followed Jesus to the cross, and Mary's at that tomb at that first discovery, and she wants to make those final arrangements, and Jesus is gone. And do you ever, you have that experience, right? Where you feel like I've been strong, and it's the one thing, right? And like, I think for Mary, it was like that one thing. They've taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they have put him. And she turned around and she saw Jesus standing there, and Jesus asked, woman, why are you crying? And she doesn't realize it's Jesus. And she says, sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where they have put him and I will get him. So we have these 3 stories of lament. Just some thoughts. How do you see Jesus, God, responding to each of them in those laments? Where might we see that dialogue or relationship?
Well, I think with Mary, he calls her by name. Isn't that correct? He just says her name.
I think he does. And then she's like, I don't have my Bible in front of me, but yes, I should have my Bible in front of me. Sorry, y'all.
Okay.
I'm like, where is one? But yes, and she says Rabboni, right? Sorry, anyone else? What's striking for me in the Mary and Martha and Lazarus story is Jesus weeps with them. Jesus doesn't make excuses. He doesn't say, I'm sorry. I was healing other people. I was doing other things. I wish I got, like, there was stuff that he wept with them.
Kelly, you're talking about the Mary and Martha and Lazarus story. It just hit me that there was so much criticism of Martha doing things and being criticized for being so busy doing stuff, but that must have been her way to cope. And nobody said, that's okay, go ahead and cook dinner, or go ahead and clean out the closet, or whatever she was doing. We've always made her the bad guy in the movie. And she really, maybe that was her way to cope, because that's what she did. And I don't think we've ever thought about her as being needing some sympathy.
Well, and it was also an expectation that there would be food for people to eat. And honestly, thinking back, I think I've heard a lot of male preachers and teachers talk about Martha that way, but I don't know if I've ever heard any female preachers and teachers talk about Martha that way. They're just 2 sides of a coin, and that was an in the moment comparison. And I don't think that it's meant to be taken as this far reaching criticism of busyness as opposed to feet sitting. He was speaking to Martha, not to all women at that moment, right?
Well, and the part of that story at that moment is that there are all of these people there mourning and crying and being there to show their concern and grief. And she probably felt like, I need to feed these people. They're all around and they're my neighbors and whatever. So I've gotten a better look at that whole story this afternoon.
Well, and I mean, I won't speak for everybody, but when I'm in that kind of situation, stressed and grieving, that's when I'm the most likely to lash out at somebody in anger, you know, because I'm so frustrated. So to me, that's another piece of Martha's story in that passage.
So much so. So much so. Barbara, thank you for pointing that out. I love, I'm going to reflect on that today. And I've had these conversations with other women, in particular, women who are doers as response to stress. They say all the time, I totally get why Martha was doing that. That's how I respond to grief and stress. And I'm thankful for the Marthas in our lives, because they are the ones who show up with lasagnas and banana breads, and they, you know, they're making sure that we're getting nurtured and fed. So I found one of the Bibles around here just because I wanted to double check, and he does call her Mary. Jesus said to her, Mary, and she turned and said to him, Rabboni. So in that sense, she called her out by name.
Yeah.
We have a few more minutes together. I want to share a picture and sort of some final thoughts with you. But before we do that, anything else that you would like to share, or that was on your mind, or a question that has bubbled up?
I just want to say there's a participant on this call, my neighbor friend Davis, that I remember brought me a spaghetti pie one time when I was having a really hard time caring for my mom, and that was the best spaghetti pie I've ever had in my life, and it just came at the right time. So thank you, Fran.
Jane and Fran, thank you. Love that you said that, Jane. As I shared, we've had a couple hard times just in our recent past where we've been the beneficiary of meals, and I have to say they are always the best. Like, they're just the best food. I think everyone else's cooking is better, and I don't know how it happens that way. It always gives me peace when I take my own meal, and I hope that someone thinks that it tastes really good. Well, first, I want to say thank you for sharing your experiences, and I know all of us are sitting in lots of grief and pain, and just for all in a variety of ways. And I hope that this little picture will share a little bit of hope. Oh, so here's one picture here. Or one last card. I love this too. I know there's no normal to go back to, but I'm here to help you build a new one. And I'll bring snacks. This verse from Psalm 30 really struck me. When our brothers and sisters are in times of tears, it is our privilege to remember and speak the promise of resurrection for them. And I thought a lot about resurrection, and so I want to share this picture right here. Took it today. Come on, okay. So this is a picture from a road right outside my house. It's actually a road I drive maybe 5 or 6 times a day. It's very steep and hilly. It's very thin, and I'm surprised that I don't get into more car accidents, because every time someone goes around, I'm constantly ducking another car. But this little back road connects to my kids' school. It connects to the grocery store. It literally is the road that connects to the rest of Charlottesville. And when we first moved here, we moved here in the winter, and I was driving this road, and I thought it was the ugliest place I have ever seen. It's full of dead leaves. It's full of dead trees. To be quite honest, I didn't even really want to move to Charlottesville, and I didn't even really want to move into the house that we got. I mean, it just, I was in a really bad place. And so I was going to hate this road too. It just felt ugly and gray and treacherous, and the leaves were falling everywhere, and it looked unkept and not taken care of. And as it warmed up, as I was driving and as spring started to come, little buds started to come on the trees. But then the oddest thing started happening, and I took a little picture, you can see it. Literally daffodils sprung out of everywhere. So on the one picture on the side, you can see they're already coming up now. Literally in places that you would not imagine daffodils to come out of. Like this is like a steep hill kind of rocky terrain. I don't even know who would have planted daffodil bulbs in these places. Like, why would someone choose to put daffodils there? Every spring, these plants, these daffodils come up. And it was, I don't know, when I was sitting kind of in my own sort of Job experience, my own personal lamenting, I realized that these pictures, this for me, this picture is where lament and resurrection meet. Lament is that gray, rocky, unkept land. It's the dead leaves that become gross when it rains and snows and gets muddy. It's the wondering if anything can grow out of it. I mean, I really, truly do not know how anything grows out of this spot. And the promise of resurrection, I really feel, is that even in the midst of all of that, the daffodil blooms where it shouldn't. The daffodil blooms where it's unexpected. And what's interesting is, even though I think all those leaves are unhelpful, I thought about this today as I was driving, that's feeding those bulbs and those, like, that's part of God's process, right? Like, part of the dormancy of winter is to provide the sustenance for spring. And so I think we should be speaking our laments, one, so that they can be heard, so that we can hear each other's pain, but two, so that we can walk alongside each other and show one another, either be that sustenance that will help the daffodil bloom, or show one another that there are little daffodils that will spring out of the rocky terrain. And so when our brothers or sisters are in times of tears, it's our privilege to remember and speak the promise of resurrection for them. Let's close our time together now in prayer. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks that you are a God who walks alongside us, who listens to us when we lament the death of loved ones, who listens to us when we reach out from the darkest places. We give you thanks that we can communicate with you and have a dialogue with you, and that you will listen to us in all the hardest of times. I also give you thanks for the community of faith who surround us, who lift us up, who show us that you're there to take our hand, who provide food, spaghetti pies and banana breads, for speaking words of encouragement for when we need it, for being the power and the witness of resurrection for when we need it. Oh, good and gracious God, we give you thanks for the resurrection, for a reminder that there's always a daffodil that springs forth out of the yuck, and for a reminder that we have the privilege to share that story with all that we walk alongside. We give you thanks for this day, oh God, and I give you thanks for this group of people, for this community of faith. Amen.
Amen.
And
I want to thank you all. I went a little over, and I'm sorry, but thank you for your time.
And thanks,
Kelly.
and thanks to Craig for sharing his music. Absolutely.
Mhm.
I'll pass that along. He needed to go on another Zoom call. He hoped you didn't mind.
Oh, that's okay.
Mhm.
I'll try to bring him along next time. I always say that when in doubt, I invite Craig because he always makes me look really good. So.
And what was the name again of the woman that does the empathy cards?
Emily McDowell.
McDowell. Okay.
And you can, she has a site, but you can also buy them on Amazon.
Okay.
I actually purchased a set of COVID parent cards that have expletives on them, and I'm sending them to all my friends.
Good. Good for you.
I don't know if I should share that to the Presbyterian women, but I am.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Kelly. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Kelly.
See you
All
all.
right.
Thank you, Callie.
Bye.